Did you know? There were 7 different versions of Pokemon Gold and Silver, and it took almost 3 years from when Gen 2 first launched in Japan until the games finally made their way all around the world. They were ultimately translated into English, French, German, Spanish, Italian, and even Korean. Each localization featured some unique details, with regional differences starting before you even left your house in Newbart Town. In most countries, Mom's TV was playing an anime film, but in France, Mom was watching an 80s B-movie. Some versions had different Pokemon sprites, different buildings, and even some of the people were different. So I hope you'll forgive any mispronunciations on my part as we dig into Pokemon's second generation and take a look at how Gen 2 was changed all around the world. Pokemon Gold and Silver launched in Japan in late 1999 and included lots of Pokemon and trainer sprites that ended up getting changed in the international releases, but we'll get to those in a minute, because the most significant Japan exclusive content was actually in Pokemon Crystal. In every region outside Japan, the Pokemon Center in Goldenrod City was just like any other, but in Japanese versions, Goldenrod was home to the Pokemon Communication Center. By purchasing a $50 attachment called a Mobile Adapter GB and connecting it to a Game Boy Color and a cell phone, Japanese fans could use the communication center to battle and trade Pokemon over the internet. The Pokemon News Machine delivered a monthly publication directly to your Game Boy Color, costing about 10 cents per issue, the same price as each individual battle and trade. That's right, in 2001, Japanese Crystal featured both internet capabilities and microtransactions. The News Machine also provided mini-games, quizzes, and access to online leaderboards that kept track of how many steps you'd taken, battles fought, Pokemon traded, and even the largest Magikarp caught, and ranked players accordingly. You could view the high scores for all of Japan, or you could filter the results down to players in your region or area code, making it easy to see how you stacked up against the kids in your neighborhood. Japanese Crystal could even connect to Pokemon Stadium 2 and download battle data from official tournaments like the Nintendo Cup 2000. You could watch the tournament unfold on your TV, and you could even have an AI opponent take control of one of the tournament goers' Pokemon teams so you could battle against them with your own Pokemon, almost like you were actually part of the tournament yourself. Probably the biggest draw for Crystal's online service was the events it unlocked via DLC. There were downloadable events for items like odd eggs with a high chance of hatching shiny baby Pokemon, as well as events that gave you Japan exclusive items like the Blue Sky Mail and the Mirage Mail. But the most significant DLC event was the one that allowed fans to download the GS Ball, a key item that unlocked a level 30 Celebi in the Ilex Forest. The Celebi event was added back into international versions when Crystal was re-released on Virtual Console in 2018. However, all the other special features were left out, so there was a huge piece of Gen 2 that fans outside Japan never got to experience. Even before Gen 2 released in Japan, Pokemon Company CEO Ishihara was already talking about how he wanted Pokemon games to release in every region all on the same day. But his goal didn't become a reality until 4 generations later, and it ended up taking almost a year to localize Gold and Silver for the American market. Just like in Gen 1, Nintendo of America staffer Hiro Nakamura was responsible for localizing all Gen 2's big words, the ones in all caps, like the names of characters, cities, items, attacks, and of course, Pokemon. Hiro came up with the English names and then sent them to Game Freak and Nintendo's legal department for approval. But in some cases, the names he chose got rejected and had to be changed. Nob Ogasawara was responsible for all Gen 2's small words, comprising about 99% of the game's text. When we asked Nob how he translated Gen 2 differently compared to Gen 1, he told us he made a conscious decision to make the text of Gold and Silver more like Baby's First RPG, where Johto felt like a kid-friendly world full of excitement, scariness, and adventure. So he made the overall tone a bit more magical, and also removed some stuff that wasn't particularly well suited for American kids. For instance, there's a man on Route 2 who gives you a nugget, but in Japanese, nuggets are called golden balls. This appears to be a deliberate dirty joke on Game Freak's part. In Japanese slang, golden balls means testicles, so the man is essentially saying, "Here's an old man's testicles, I hope you put them to good use." This PG-13 joke was repeated in future generations, and even appeared in the Sun and Moon anime. But in English, the joke was nipped in the bud right from the start, with Nob replacing Gen 2's text with a joke about nuggets of wisdom. So even though the old man's balls are a long-running meme in Japan, the joke simply never existed in English. And Nob took it upon himself to make some cultural edits as well, like changing the descriptions of all the Buddhist shrines to identify them as Diglett sculptures, just like he did in Gen 1. But it wasn't just the game's text, there were also also some visual differences. 31 Pokémon sprites were altered for the American market, the most famous example of course being Jinx, whose black skin and blonde hair were changed to purple and white due to the racial controversy surrounding Jinx in America. All the other sprites were changed to fix design inconsistencies, like Feraligator's white underbelly and Lantern's yellow spots. In both Gen 1 and 2, Pokémon designers created sprites first, then the art director Ken Sugimori made their official artwork later, often making design revisions as he saw fit. But after Sugimori's revisions, the sprites themselves weren't revised to match the artwork, leaving lots of inconsistencies between the Pokémon's art and sprites. However, most of these inconsistencies were fixed during Gold and Silver's year-long localization process, which is why so many sprites were different in the original Japanese versions compared to the later international versions. Likewise, some sprites were changed for consistency with the anime, like Slowpoke for example. Sugimori's artwork never revealed what Slowpoke's belly looked like, so in Japan it was white, but in the West it was later changed to pink to match Slowpoke's anime appearances. The same can be said for Teddiursa's feet and Donphan's trunk. 5 trainer sprites were changed as well, but for cultural reasons. Fishers had their cigarettes taken away, mediums had their religious beads confiscated, and sages' folded prayer hands were changed to crossed arms. Female swimmers and beauties were made just a little less sexy. In Japan, they were winking, but in America, their eyes were pried back open, and beauties had about 12 inches of extra material sewn onto their skirts. The final results of the localization process was that the English versions of Gen 2 were more kid-friendly and featured sprites that looked more like the Pokemon they represented. And of course, all the online features were unfortunately stripped out as well. Just like in Gen 1, the European versions of Gen 2 were all based on the English localization. In other words, they were translations of a translation, 2 steps removed from the original source material. But unlike in America, Europe had an almost entirely new team of translators. There were 15 translators in total, but only 3 of them had been around during Gen 1. Julian Bartikov, the lead French translator, was one of those 3. Julian gave us the inside scoop on our Gen 1 video, so we brought him back for this video to tell us how things went down in Gen 2. Early in Gen 1's localization, Game Freak originally wanted Europe to use Pokemon's Japanese names, so Julien had to fight for the right to give Pokemon new French names, for example by telling Game Freak that Squirtle and Charmander's Japanese names sounded like the French slang words for stoner and feces. Game Freak didn't really trust him, but they ultimately gave in, and grudgingly allowed Julien to rename old Gen 1's Pokemon. After Red and Blue launched in France, Julien's translation was so well received by fans and critics alike that Game Freak felt he'd proven himself. So for Gen 2, they were now more than happy to let him create new French names for all the Johto Pokemon. Julien's penchant for injecting mysticism into Pokemon names, his love of movies, and his newfound clout resulted in the French versions featuring more unique differences, more so than any other localization, including English. Julien renamed Misdreavus Fatharev, a reference to Will-o'-the-Wisps from mythology and folk tales all around the world. According to legend, Will-o'-the-Wisps are ghostly lights witnessed by travelers in the night, who get led astray in the hope the lights are a friendly presence carrying a lantern. Julien also renamed Crobat Nostenfair, a combination of Nosferatu and the French word for hell. In fact, he named the entire Zubat family after Nosferatu, the 1922 German horror film about a vampire with a special interest in the wife of his real estate agent. In the Japanese and English versions of Pewter City, you can trade your hunter for a Xatu nicknamed Paul. Julien changed Paul's name to Quetzalcoatl in honor of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent worshipped by some ancient Mesoamerican tribes as the god of wind and wisdom. In every region except France, the TV at your house in Newbarktown is playing Night on the Galactic Railroad, a 1985 anime movie about 2 boys who ride a train into the stars and past Christian heaven. Interestingly, the main character Giovanni was voiced by Veronica Taylor in the English dub, the same actress who played the voice of Ash Ketchum. But in the French version, Julien changed the TV's description so it was showing Have a Drink and Take It Easy in Saint-Tropez, an 80s French comedy about a girl who tells her parents she's going to Brittany to study, but actually spends her summer partying in the south of France. When we asked Julien why he changed the TV, he said, because it was funny to imagine that kind of B-movie airing on the TV channels of Fantasy Japan. Haha. In fact, Julien said he injected B-movie references into all the games he translated, including Ocarina of Time, Super Mario 64, and Banjo-Kazooie. As we mentioned in our Gen 1 video, the Spanish and Italian translations had fewer staff and a smaller budget, budget, so neither language was ever given unique Pokemon names. Both versions were also plagued with lots of translation errors, and almost all the mistakes made in Gen 1 were carried over into Gen 2, like how Pokemon caught with fishing rods were called evil in Spanish. Also in Spanish, the attack counter was mistranslated to Contador. In Italian, it was mistranslated to Contatori. Rather than a counterattack, both words refer to something that counts, like a water meter or a scoreboard. Italian translator Elena Fogazzaro told us the same mistake was made in both languages because the Spanish translators got it wrong first, then the Italians basically copied their homework. In short, out of all 7 versions, the Spanish and Italian localizations were basically the runts of the litter. Just like in Gen 1, the Germans fulfilled their cultural stereotype, and their localization was efficient and accurate. They didn't use as much imagination as the French, but they also made far fewer errors compared to the Spanish and Italians. But there were a few oddities, like how up until Gen 8, the paralysis-inducing attack Glare was mistranslated to Giftblick, which actually means poison glance, frustrating German players who wanted to poison their enemies but ended up paralyzing them instead. The Germans also renamed Cyndaquil Furigel, which means fire hedgehog. This made some German fans believe that Cyndaquil was a hedgehog, even though the Pokédex actually classifies Cyndaquil as a mouse. The last of the bunch, South Korea, finally got localizations of Gold and Silver in 2002, more than a year after Europe and almost 3 years after the games first launched in Japan. While the European localizations were more similar to the English versions, the Korean localization was closer to the original Japanese releases. In Korea, they used the same sprites as in Japan, even Jinx, and they used all the original trainer sprites as well. Pokemon did get unique Korean names, but they were mostly just direct translations or transliterations of their Japanese names, and didn't feature any references to culture or mythology. But there is one name that stands out. Ho-Oh is called Chilsekjo, which means 7-colored bird, presumably because of the Pokemon's association with rainbows. Unlike every other region's Gold and Silver, the Korean versions could not be played on a Game Boy. Korean text is so complicated that the game's text rendering system actually demands more video RAM to display it than all the other languages, meaning it can only be played on a Game Boy Color. In an even more unfortunate turn of events for South Korea, they never received a localization of Pokemon Crystal at all, and thus never got access to Japan's online features or DLC. But at least South Korea got Gold and Silver. Most regions were neglected entirely. Some of the world's most prominent languages never got any Gen 2 localizations, including Chinese, Hindi, Arabic, and Portuguese. In total, about half the world's population never got to play Gold, Silver, or Crystal because they didn't speak any of the 7 languages the games were translated into. Or more accurately, I should say officially translated into, because there were some bootlegs produced to meet demand in those neglected regions, especially in China, due to their lax laws dealing with intellectual property rights. The most famous of these bootlegs is what fans lovingly refer to as Vietnamese Crystal. These pirated cartridges circulated widely in Vietnam in the early 2000s and are believed to have come into existence when the original Japanese games were illegally translated into Chinese, then later got translated into English. In other words, they were a pirate's translation of a pirate's translation. Vietnamese Crystal famously refers to Pokemon as elves, displays the word f whenever you receive an item, and contains lots of bizarre quotes, like "the tower is built for pocket monsters to practice Buddhism," or "asses is $1,000. Pokemon is the world's largest multimedia franchise after all, and it just goes to show that nature abhors a vacuum, and when it comes to Pokemon, life finds a way. Okay, we didn't have enough time to cover every version difference, mistranslation, and certainly not all the bootlegs, but these were our favorites. Did you also know that Nintendo of America almost changed Pikachu into a tiger with huge breasts during Gen 1's localization? For more facts about Gen 1 around the world, click the video on screen. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you enjoyed this video, click the like button.